Alright, another response video to Hythloday, who's an incredibly rude and obnoxious yob. Modern mystic. Who cares? This video, Statement of Benatar's Theorem, question mark. Now, did you listen to this video, modern mystic? And do you think this is a valid piece of argumentation? There's 26 minutes of nothing, of insensible babble. With full of just rude, it's an absurdity to ask a question. That's absurd. I can go through the quotes of his derogatory language, and we should all just accept that. I should just accept this is his sincere or real reaching effort to come up with the truth and to understand. I mean, this is absolutely ludicrous. We've been through, like, I don't know, what, 7 videos, and it wasn't until now that he realized Better Never to Have Been, the title of the Benatar book, for which he has Benatar's name in the title of his video, meant that Benatar was making a comparison between existence and non-existence. And I'm the one that's absurd? Benatar's absurd for asking the question? Yeah, he hasn't even read the book, no doubt. I mean, and he's going to critique it. Amazing. Just fucking amazing. And I'm not supposed to react to that with some sort of, oh, why am I fucking bothering with this fucking bullshit? I mean, this is just such a waste of goddamn time. If this is what people who claim to have an intellect are going to do when they're searching for very simple conclusions. I mean, this is not that complicated. And that's how he ends his video. Back at the is-Oz bullshit. Somebody makes up some sort of crap, okay, value relativist for their own convenience, their own circular logic. We say you can't make an ought from an is. Therefore, oughts are not possible to make because everything that's a fact is an is. So there, we've evaded all facts. Facts can no longer indicate a conclusion. Okay, so you can't make any... It doesn't matter. If you say something is not minimally efficient, it does not mean anything. Because you can't turn it into a frickin' practical conclusion, which would be, well, let's not fund that then. If it's not minimally efficient, this is... it's not a good idea for people... It is not a good idea for people to eat dioxin. Well, therefore, we can't do anything with that fact. Let's just keep feeding it to our kids. Because we can't figure out that maybe we ought not to feed it to our kids. Huh? What is this crap you people make up? And right, I'm wrong because I say, hey, I think your God theory of is-oughtness is just that. It's a delusion in your own fucking heads. Alright, made out of absolutely nothing. It makes no sense whatsoever to say you can never get to an ought, and that's essentially what you're saying. There are no such things as an ought. By saying you can't use a factual is to describe oughts. I mean, that's all you're saying. You're saying, I don't want to hear about what I should do. I don't want to hear about what should be. I just wanted an excuse to do whatever the fuck I want to, and not care about minimal efficiency, and not care about being an asshole. I mean, this is just such bullshit. And I'm supposed to somehow counter the non-existence of your God of is-ought bullshit with what? Again, how do I argue the non-existence of your non-existent thing? Your premise is so completely circular, your evidence is completely circular, it means absolutely nothing. It's founded on absolutely nothing but an evasion of goddamn responsibility, and nothing more. Fuck. I'm not a value relativist. Do we have to, is that sure how we'll start the conversation? Just say, look, I'm not a God delusionist. I don't think value is some kind of ambiguous thing that everybody just makes it all up. No, I think there's one universe, we're all living in the same universe, and you either draw rational and sensible and accurate conclusions about how it functions, or you draw wrong conclusions. But that's it, there's right and wrong statements. Period. Alright? There's no multiple truths here. Fuck you. Anyway. Alright, so I did take notes, but I'll play some of this video, but this was just horrid. So he's not convinced by the fact that it's you know, the Mars example he brought up a couple of times, but I can change the example. But I mean, the point is that we care more. There's more of an urgency to fix something that's broken than to somehow enhance or gild a lily. Right? I mean, you could have a lily and it's perfectly fine, and you could say, oh, somehow I need to improve the lily. Or you could save a kid from cancer or something. And obviously, saving somebody from harm is going to be much more important than gilding a lily. You don't need to fix something that's not broken. And the sensible argument, the sensible conclusion you reach from this is not that, well, the Martians don't care that the Martians don't exist either. You know, that's irrelevant. We're not talking about what the Martians think. We're talking about what thinking things would think. And if we reverse the situation, if there was Martians and no Earthlings, I'm sure the Martians wouldn't be sitting around going, oh damn, I wish those Earthlings were around to build giant, you know, Ferris wheels and stuff. You know, but we could use some giant Ferris wheels over here. You know, and oh, think about all their great TV shows. Oh damn, lament. No, that's not happening. That wouldn't happen. But the purpose of it is to just recognize that we don't get upset because something isn't gilded. We do get upset if something's in pain. And that's a rational response, I'm arguing. That's logical. And it's logic that bleeds through all our bullshit. That viscerally we do understand, you know, that there's a greater urgency. The more danger something's in, the greater the urgency. That's where the weight of urgency is. And there's very little urgency to go out and correct something that's benign. Something, a tumor that isn't cancerous. You just leave it the fuck alone often. Because you don't fuck with it. It doesn't need to be fucked with. Anyway. Alright. Doesn't make sense to evaluate. So that's what the direct quote is. It doesn't make sense to him for somebody to ask these questions. To ask the question, what is the function of this biological mass on Earth? And Benatar asked that question, but he does narrow it. Okay, he says right in the first few pages of his book, look, there's a whole biosphere out there, there's animals, all this other stuff. All this stuff probably applies to them, but I'm making an argument about humans, okay, and I'm going to narrow it to humans. But it applies to all these other sentient creatures. So on the table is the question of the 4 billion years of evolution of life on Earth, and for what constructive benefit, what accomplishment, what gain, quote unquote, for what pain? And that doesn't make sense to ask that question. In what context does it not make sense? Every single thing we have, we evaluate. If I was to propose nuclear open pit nuclear power plants, I just throw in the uranium and just mix it in some slurry and just have some, little heat transfer coils around it and let it just outgas right into the atmosphere. We could all figure out that that's probably not a very efficient way to make energy, because a bunch of things are going to get irradiated and harmed. And we can make the simple value equation and evaluate that this is not a productive thing to do, and so you wouldn't turn the key to start those plants. You wouldn't turn the key. And so that's what's being done here. That's too complicated for you? The most important value creation thing that we know of in the universe, biological life on Earth, and that should be exempt from evaluation. We should not evaluate the functionality of this biomass, of segments of the biomass, and of our own existence. Well, I think that's ludicrous not to. I think it's an absurdity for somebody with a brain not to do that. Outside of some God delusion. Okay. I mean, really, the whole game has been controlled by ignorant forces. And you're saying it would be stupid to go out and analyze what the ignorant forces have done? What they've created? No, I don't think so. Alright, So yeah, you got to evaluate the minimum efficiency. And we evaluate everything of any importance in this world, and certainly we should evaluate the function of the human race and the individual humans living in their societies, all of it is subject to evaluation. We've evaluated Rome, we've evaluated lots of civilizations, we found their benefits and their faults. That's what you do. That's what intelligence does. We've evaluated different systems of government. I mean, we evaluate things. That's what brains do. They evaluate. All right, by some evaluating system, preferential for who? I never use the word preferential, but whatever. It's a system that's being evaluated, and again, you haven't read Benatar's book, so I don't think you should put his name in your titles, because you're not being fair to Benatar. But he goes extensively on the fact that this who business is quite, it's first irrelevant, and second, he's arguing that everyone's better off not to have been, and the only thing that makes you think otherwise is a delusion, is just your addiction. Okay, I mean, heroin addicts think heroin's worth it. Okay, they do, and you know, that's because they're possessed by their addiction, and human beings are possessed by. They've been raised in an atmosphere of pro-life propaganda, and you know, they haven't weeded themselves of the God delusion, in the sense that God is still smeared on all of their cultural instruments and the entire propaganda engine. And so this presumption of purpose still exists, and it's just a presumption of purpose. And the purpose of Benatar's book is to analyze: is there any purpose? Is there any accomplishment? Is there anything that needs improving in the universe? And if not, then we're wasting harm in a futile effort to create an improvement that can't be created. So again, it's not about some sort of who business. Okay, this isn't an argument about social rights or any of that other crap. It's a more fundamental argument about the biological mechanism. We're not talking about specific definitions of murder or something, or, you know, self-interest versus blah blah blah. No, we're talking about the natural system and the native mechanism. Alright, so absurdity is what he called it. Blah blah blah. Fuck you. I just find it incredibly obnoxious language. You know, unless you're going to back it up with something, and I don't think you've challenged anything Benatar wrote, and I don't think you've challenged a single sentence I've stated about the nature of the human organism, or the nature of the biomass, or the nature of the universe itself. I don't think you've challenged a single one of my premises. You've just said absurd to even contemplate the question, and I don't like it. It doesn't convince me. Well, that's not a counter argument. It's useless drivel. Alright, defending the defined values. So then he gets into this circular logic argument, and I'm arguing you're the one full of circular logic. It's not convincing, therefore it wasn't a good argument, therefore it wasn't sufficient, therefore, you know, bullshit. You know, you're not the proof, you're not the demonstrator of the veracity of the argument. Sorry. I mean, I'm sorry. It did take you 15 episodes even to get up to the minimum speed to figure out that better off never to have been was a statement about not being. Yeah. Fuck. Alright, and most of Benatar's book is a defense of the values being defined. Most of his book, most of my videos contain defenses of the arguments being made. I'm arguing that the real value gravity is in the negative conscious experience, and that the positive experience is more byproduct than anything else. It's the byproduct of getting out of the negative. And even most people's continued investment in life might likely have more to do with the fear of death than any real affection for the game they're playing. It's just that simple. Death doesn't sound like a fun thing to do. It's not a neutral alternative. There's not a fair choice here. Death or life. The death thing definitely seems to have this component of certain harm. It doesn't look like it's going to be free. And so people run from it. And they run in the direction of life. Because it's the only other direction there is. Alright, hypothetical versus practical. He didn't put in those terms, but I am. Look, hypothetical examples are used to illustrate what you're doing, what the system is. So you have a 2-cycle engine, you can compare it to a 4-cycle engine. Or you can compare it to an electric motor, or you can compare it to something else. And so you use these other comparisons, and you can use some hypothetical sometimes, some sort of different kind of technology. What if we had anti-gravity cars? What would be the consequence of that? And blah, blah, blah. And you can do that. And some of my hypotheticals are less realistic, and but they're reality based. I'm not giving you a hypothetical that involves something outside naturally possible phenomenon. I'm giving you examples of real world. Some of them are real world. So I'll go back to the rat example. So you have a rat maze. I'm claiming, okay, that the human experiment isn't much different from an overview, from on top, from looking down at it, from just a bunch of rats running mazes. Okay, now they can run the maze in some way where rats get cheese a lot and they lie around and have fun and sex, and there's a high satisfaction level for the rats. Or they can chase the cheese in some sort of damaging way where they have to fight with each other, and there's guts and blood and horror and screaming and all kinds of harmed rats in this process of running the maze. And for most of these experiments, logically you would say you don't engage in this business of creating rats for the purpose of running mazes for no objective. Most of the times human beings have to have some sort of thing they're going to accomplish through this process. And so that's the first thing you look at is what's this experiment going to prove or demonstrate, or what's the value of the experiment. And the first argument to be made for human beings is there is no value. We're not an experiment conducted by a scientist, we're an experiment conducted by crude mechanical physical forces. That's what initiated the experiment, and had no agenda, no purpose, no function to the experiment. And so it just exists for the sake of itself. And so now it has to come up with a legitimacy out of something else now, because it's not serving an innate purpose. It's not serving a need outside of itself. And so all you have is what it does. And what I'm saying is that even in highly functional circumstance, you really can't justify the harm perpetrated, the guts on the wall, to justify perpetuating this. It's not a complex argument that you will, in the Benatar sense, fail. You will have a greater inefficiency. Your better efficiency is not to do it. Alright, so that's another example of a hypothetical, or a frame, a metaphor for the frame for which this is being judged. It's not being judged based on what rat gets what it wants and what other rat gets what it wants. It's being judged based on the efficiency of grinding these rats through this game. Alright. Everyone can just make it up. Yeah, you're back to this value relativist shit. So again, I'll just say for the record, I'm not a value relativist. I think there's one single truth in the universe. I think you either accurately describe it or inaccurately describe it, and that's the only choices. Maybe we're both inaccurately describing it, but we're certainly If we have a conflict and a contradiction, that contradiction screams for resolution. Somebody is right and somebody is wrong, and that's the way it is. Your contention that whatever race is better than heroin addict. Okay, yeah, well, I guess what I'm saying is the premise of your argument is that somehow the human race is doing something better than a heroin addict chasing their heroin, chasing their fix. You're saying there's some other mechanism involved that's somehow more grand, more purposeful, more functional. I think Benatar and me can both argue that no, you're just chasing pre-established delusions of accomplishment and purpose, and they have nothing to do with anything real. They're just perceptions in your head. That's it. They're not correlated to any kind of rational argument that can be made in the real world. There is no damsel in distress that our existence saves. We accomplish no good in the sense that we rectify no negative condition in the universe that pre-existed our existence. Without that benefit, we have to make our function out of what we're doing, and I'm saying all you've got really is satisfied addiction, and that's virtually nothing, as the Martian example demonstrates, because we don't lament the absence of potential profit. We only recognize it when there's loss on the table. And again, this isn't an argument you've countered with anything. I mean, you've just said it's ludicrous, or it's wrong, or it's silly, or it's stupid, but you haven't made an argument. What's your counter-argument about the distinction between the weight value of a damsel in distress versus, like I said, let's say I had two things floating in space. Big fat guy just rolling around, perfectly comfortable, not hungry, not too cold, not too hot, just perfectly comfortable rolling around. But he's fat, okay, which is sort of imperfect. And somehow he could be improved. I mean, he could have three-dimensional television and something else. He could have warmer feet or something. And then you have starving person, and they're in pain. They're pangs of hunger. They're sick and weak, and there's a struggle just to think, and they're really not in a comfortable place at all. Which one is? Where's the imperative? To go help fatty, or to go help the starving person? And I think it's obvious the imperative isn't to improve the condition of the thing that doesn't need. The imperative is to satisfy need. And again, I brought this up in my video, you ignored it. Need is an important word here. It's an important concept. Okay? the condition of being alive and being sentient is to need. To need. Alright? And it is need that compels. Not purpose outside of the individual, the necessity of rectifying the brokenness of a dissatisfied or unsatisfied need. That's what compels attention. If there's no risk of need being created, then there's no need to screw with it, besides what could be called a perceptual need, a delusion of need. But there wouldn't be anything real. It's like somebody thinking, like, say you have a little stuffed animal, or you have a little dog, a little statue on your mantle, and it's all dusty, and you say, ooh, it's dusty, and it probably doesn't like to be dusty. I mean, you start to anthropomorphize and sense that somehow it has a welfare, and that its welfare needs care for. It's not sensible. I mean, I couldn't throw a stuffed animal into the garbage can. I couldn't just throw one in the garbage can without feeling weird about it when its little beady eyes are looking at me and shit. There's nothing rational in that. It's completely a manifestation of my psychology. It has no logical basis. And that's the foundational argument that Benatar is making, is that we have anthropomorphized, we have extended emotionalism into our perception of what we're doing, And that's all we have is emotions feeding emotional thoughts. And we're validating our own delusions by becoming emotionally dependent, by becoming gamed by the simplest of semantics, the simplest of synthetic aesthetics. Make us think things are okay or things aren't okay. We're trivial in our analyzing of real problems. Trivial, because it's all really just about cuteness or some other kind of bullshit. And we see it in how culture functions. We reward people for trivial accomplishments, and we fundamentally ignore people for tremendous sacrifice. I mean, how much energy has the human race expended on glorifying celebrity, versus paying any attention to people who died of asbestos to give them progress, or died in coal mines? Does anybody know the names of the guys who died in coal mines? Can you recite any of them? Do they put them on monuments in Washington, D.C.? No, they don't do that. Alright, meaningless to ask the question. Well, again, now that I just don't know what to say to you for that one. And again, so back to the Mars thing again. You came back to it at the end, and it's just like I said, it's just not getting it. Okay, the fact that human beings don't, in any kind of numbers or in any kind of mass, sense any horror at the megatons of fun that aren't taking place on Mars, that doesn't disturb them any, means that that's why the asymmetry has weight, is because the fun stuff isn't nearly have the meaning gravity of the negative. Alright, no objective truths. Yeah, okay, now we're back to the is-ought shit. So anyway, I'll play some of this shit just so you can hear some of this crap for yourselves. See how much time. I'm sorry, that took a long time to just get through the bullshit. Let's see, 13 minutes or so. 12. I'll go to 12:30.
Get quoted in another slide. But we don't lament the non-existent Martians. But neither do they. I mean, it doesn't seem, it isn't a compelling enough reason to convince me that this is a logical schema for valuating. So that's on the valuation system, point one. And point two, which I can't concede, is the fundamental question, really. Asking the question, is it even a valid, meaningful question? This idea of, is it better to have never been? I'm not even sure it makes sense. And you need to argue, because from the meanings of what does it mean to be better? It's the state of affairs that we might judge as preferential by some valuation system. Yeah, I pose questions here. Preferential for whom? The person, existing person, society existing, or for the hypothetical person?
Oh,
it seems a bit absurd, but I'm
yeah, there's the absurd part again. Yeah, well, no, neither one of these cover it, douchebag. I mean, really, what my other channel was called Ephalist. I've made the argument that I think all life on planet Earth is running a deficit. So to sit there and say person and society as if that's all there are. There's persons and there's societies? No, there's a thing called human existence, and then there's a thing beyond that called the existence of all biological life. Those are the categories too. But again, the argument in Benatar's book is that everything fundamentally, is going to run into this dilemma where they are going to suffer, and there will be no good reason for it. There won't be anything accomplished. They will gain some gratification that has no real value beyond the fact that it replaces their deprivated condition. And it's used up by the replacement of their deprivated condition. You cannot use your happiness to undo somebody else's unhappiness. You do not undo somebody's suffering in a mental institution right now, or suffering in a cancer ward right now, by having yourself a yummy donut. You do not undo their condition. And your gratification is, as pointed out on the examples of Mars, Venus, Mercury, and all these other places, is of no real value. You are not instrumental to any need satisfaction or any circumstance in need of fixing in the universe. And that is the asymmetry. Oh, shit. Alright, so he says a bunch of other crap here, but we're going to jump ahead to 20.
Problem about how can we discuss insofar as seeking agreement over some basic ideas here as well. What do we mean by better? You know, this is
whatever. I mean, like I said, this has only been gone over. It's been the premise of the whole thing. The better is in the asymmetry. It's demonstrated by a +1 and a 0. Kind of basically just pointing out that there's a scenario here where somehow we're not doing as well as we think we are in terms of accomplishing something, because we're basically open the door to this huge negative, and there is no real positive to be derived, and that's a huge liability. But ignoring that, yeah, the general question is what is our function? What is our efficiency? And it is for you to presume me to tell me that it's all efficient, that there's no possible experiment that could be a disgusting waste of suffering. I changed the condition. What if I gave you a diagram that spelled it out for you? All right, there's going to be a World War III, and then there's going to be a World War IV. Okay, and 5 billion people are going to be starved and brutalized to death. What, is it all worth it? Is that what you're going to tell me? You know it's all worth it? You can tell me that? You can tell me that World War II was worth it, right? You know it. Why? Why do you know it? How do you know it? What do you know it based on? And all I'm saying is from my value equation. That's right, the values we've defended and defined that are based in this idea that the negatives have far more value than your superficial gratifications. Your satisfied need has no substance to it to go rectify or bandage the afflicted. Their affliction exists, and their affliction, the screams, are a lot louder than your laughter in terms of a value comparison. And I would say entirely louder. I would say that your laughter is of nothing, has no meaning as a significant positive, because it is only a rectification of your need to acquire that state, the deprivation that you were born with and that you've never sufficiently resolved.
My interpretation, and I guess at the answer that seems sensible for me, and thus ask the question, I guess. You know, when we say preferential, you know, something is better, it's a preferential state of affairs, and I say for whom, I think we're talking about persons, which hints at the problem, the aforementioned problem, about how can we discuss non-existing persons.
Look, we're not discussing non-existent persons, though. This is so stupid. But we do know there's going to be a future. This isn't that complicated. All right? It's like if you're going to build cars or something, you know, and the beginning of the plant, there's no car. And by the end of the plant, there's a car. All right? There's a process, and the process creates things. And the argument is about what are we processing? What is this machine that we have running? And is it processing anything of real value? All right, but there's going to be a future, okay, and it will be decided what its composition is our choice, All right, so we're not only we not only have power over the maze that the rats are running in, but we have the power, okay, to simply say we're not going to make rats run mazes anymore. It's stupid.
As if that's being the case, if that's what better means, then I'm reluctant to admit the comparison of non-existent states as even a valid question.
Well, again, it's just silly to say it's not valid to say whether you should have something or not have something. It's about as a fundamental a question as you can answer or ask. Okay, should we poison the water? Should we take a bath in our drinking water? Should we? I mean, you can ask these fundamental questions. The answers are yes or no. It's not that complicated. Should we have it? Should we not have it? I mean, come on. This is just such bullshit to make it seem like it's some sort of extraordinarily bizarre contemplation to sit there and ask the simple question, is it minimally efficient?
So I asked the question to Mendham, is this a valid and meaningful question, and how is it, I guess.
Yeah, well, I've been there and done that, so that's just silly. It's just silly to sit there and say that to me after all these videos. Please. Yeah, it's a really important question, and it's really a valid question. That's right. It's the most important question, and it's the most critical solution. To ask the question, should we eradicate malaria? Yeah, if we can, that's what we should do. Yeah. It's not that complicated. And to me, the two questions are just about the same.
Can we compare non-existent states with existing life? Now I make a remark, we compare and contrast the fact of non-existence with existence, but we can't make qualitative judgments on individual hypothetical state.
Oh, whatever that even means. No, we can't have a conversation about whether it's better to have 9 billion people on Earth, or 7 billion people on Earth, or 5 billion people on Earth. Can't have that conversation, says Hythloday. No, fuck you, we can have that conversation.
It's of non-existence.
I mean, even though it involves the non-existence of 2 billion people, we can have the conversation.
Nonsense. That appears to be a nonsense.
Yeah, it appears to be a nonsense. So what's the other word? Absurdity, and now we have nonsense. Fuck you.
I quote or paraphrase in Mendham. In a recent video, he makes the observation that we don't lament the non-existence of life on Mars.
Yeah, we don't lament the non-existent fun on Mars.
And he spends a lot of time rephrasing this and repackaging it in different analogies.
Yeah, well, whatever. Another kind of a slight, kind of an insulting way of saying it. I'm not repackaging it. I'm having to re-argue it in different ways because, guess what? You're absurdly stupid. So it requires that.
Same sentiment. And, I just can remark that neither do non-existent Martians.
Yeah, again, but do you think if there was existing Martians, do you think Schopenhauer Martian would show up and Benatar Martian would show up? So maybe Martians would be able to contemplate the question and say, oh yeah, we're really not missable. We really are fundamentally assholes that are completely chasing our own ass and accomplishing absolutely nothing and doing it this hugely expensive biosphere that we're enslaving to our needs. And that's pretty much disgusting. And they could draw that conclusion if they existed. But that's not the purpose of raising the point that we don't. And the point is that we are capable of judging what's on fire, what needs attention, what is urgent, what it requires, what demands repair or correction. And we don't think the Martian circumstance demands any correction. And that's for a reason. It's because we don't really value the positive experience. We value the human experience. And as I pointed out in my video, and something you will not respond to, or you have not, we do that because we are speciesists, because we are natively ists. We ist a lot. We racist. We nationalize. Nationalism. We're ismsers. However you want to describe that. That's right. We're addiction cores, compelled by bullshit. And one of our bullshits is this perception that the universe needs Earthlings, but it doesn't need Venetians. And the fact of that perception, that demonstrates, it illustrates a flaw probably in the logic, because we're not going to be able to explain why we're somehow necessary and they're not.
Lament the non-existence, the lost pleasures, the lost pains.
Why would you lament a lost pain? So that's just a sloppy sentence.
And I can only say, I mean, what of it? It doesn't. The question doesn't make any sense.
Right. So again, if I don't, I mean, you go through anything. I mean, if I don't miss something, if I can't recognize its absence, like let's say there's a nuclear power plant, and the nuclear power plant goes offline for a year, and I can't even tell the difference. Okay, prices didn't go up, nothing changed. I totally didn't miss it. Wouldn't that indicate that maybe the nuclear power plant isn't vital somehow? If my prices didn't go up and I still have the same energy and everything's okay, then why shouldn't I just assume I personally don't need nuclear power plants? Right? That it has no value to me, this one anyway. That means nothing. It's demonstrated its meaninglessness. And I'm just saying the very fact that we don't lament the absence of Ferris wheels on Mars, that it doesn't hurt us or pain us or weaken us in some way or harm us in some way, is a realization of the asymmetry in the fact that the absence of the good is not a bad, okay, because it doesn't. We don't recognize it as with the same gravity weight that we give a bad. It isn't like a harm. The absence of the happy Ferris wheel is not like the existence of the cancer. They're not equal. And that's why there's an asymmetry.
To me, perhaps so I stated again, it seems meaningless to consider, and this is what it seems to me, to raise the question about non-existent Martians and put it on the table that we're considering, is we are considering, you know, whether we ought to improve the situation of...
No, that's not what we're considering, whether we ought to improve. That's not what we're considering at all. Benatar's statement is pretty fucking clear. You're better off never to have been. We're considering not improving your condition. We're considering the absence of your condition. And the fact that the absence of your condition will be as meaningless as the absence of the Martians. It will mean absolutely nothing as a negative. It will have absolutely no negative value in the universe. It will create no brokenness, no harm, no deprivation, no negative whatsoever. No negative whatsoever. No harm whatsoever for you not to exist, for this planet not to exist. That is the fact. That is the asymmetry. The absence of our existence does not produce a negative. It does not produce any kind of negative. It does not produce anything negative except in your delusional mind. Period. Nowhere in the real universe or in the real world can you demonstrate the absence, the loss, the weight, the gravity, the meaning, the substance. You can't articulate it, you can't describe it, you can't define it, because it doesn't exist. We clean up a mess we make, we do not clean up anything else. That is a fact of our existence, and that's why our existence is fail.
Non-existent Martians. And that seems an absurdity.
Yeah, well, that's because you're, again, absurdly dim and can't figure out that the purpose of the bringing up the example is not to say something stupid like, well, the non-existent Martians don't think about it either. We're not non-existent. We can think about it. We can evaluate it. And I'm still going to argue with you. It's an extremely interesting fact that we don't put negative, meaningful weight on the absence of goods. We put meaningful weight on the absence of satisfied negatives. Unsatisfied negatives.
No, I've not got to the bottom of this, and I'm wary of, I think there's a.
I mean, really, I'm supposed to read this? True by your own definition, circular reasoning. And he makes the accusation that, well, I'll see if he makes it here. Really irritating. The ought-if thing. He's saying somehow I misinterpreted his video. No, go play your video. Alright? You're used as an argument. You didn't just raise... Why would be the point? As if we don't have enough nonsense in these videos of raising something you claim to be not relevant to the argument. Oh, there's a danger of the slippery is-ought slope. So I could do that every time I'm going to have a discussion with somebody. I'll just raise the danger of the is-ought slope. The danger of the is-ought slope. No, I didn't mean it as an argument. I wasn't really arguing you were doing that. No, I was just raising it as a possibility that you're doing that. Wow. And that's supposed to be a rational way to interact with people? Is to sit there and raise a bunch of flags that have absolutely nothing to do with the game you're playing? I mean, what, you're gonna call me for whatever, crossing the blue line in a football game?
Something that's often said is, everything seems to boil down to semantics in the end, which I'm wondering whether this is philosophy.
Oh, well, whatever. This has gotten so goddamn to the base, alright, to the root, to the core. The claim being made is the value in the universe, the only recognizable, discernible value, is in the welfare of a sentient being. They create value. By existing